Little walk here at the Orange Turkey Hill Preserve. I come here a lot. Hello everyone, it is Dick the Eagle here, and today I want to talk to you about what I would and would not change about the start of my through hike in the Appalachian Trail. I'm taking a lot of this with me as I continue hiking, and as I want to continue hiking and exploring very many places. So I thought I'd share with you my thoughts on what I would change and what I would keep the same. So one thing that I would definitely keep the same is my pack. I love the Osprey Exos 58 that I've been using. It has the right number of compartments, it's the right size for me, and it fits super well. It's durable, it has traveled with me for 1,850 miles, and it has a lot of life in it left as well, I believe. So I definitely recommend the Osprey Exos 58. Unless you're a minimal carrier, then you could probably get a version that has a little bit less. But the weight of it was good too, not a lot of additional weight, like 2.5 pounds total pack weight. And the way it fit, the way I carried the pack, the way it sat on my shoulders and hips, I feel that I did not notice it as much as I would if I was carrying heavier weight in other packs. The one thing I would say is that, well, I do like the mesh liner, that's another thing I like about it. The one thing I would say is that I needed to fix it when the waist strap was a bit too short. It was getting too big for me and I could not tighten it anymore. So I did come up with a fix for that thanks to some trail angels. That's the only real issue that I had with that pack. I would get the same pack again. My sleeping bag was also a win. Now I recognize that it is 4 pounds of a sleeping bag, and eventually I would love to invest in a lighter sleeping bag. However, it worked well for me in the cold. It kept me warm, and I didn't mind carrying a little bit of extra weight for that extra comfort and security that this particular sleeping bag brought me. It was the Nemo Forte 20-degree sleeping bag, and it kept me warm down to the coldest night on Clingman's Dome when it reached 12 degrees. And I did couple that with my liner from Sea to Summit. It was a fleece liner, and I coupled that with wearing extra layers of clothing as well. But it did the trick, and when it got wet, when I had a leaky tent, I did not get wet inside the bag, so I was able to stay warm. It's a synthetic bag, which is why it's heavier. But once I have a sleep tent that I can trust, I think that I can invest in a down bag, which doesn't behave the same if it gets wet, but if I have a tent I know I won't get wet in, then I'll be able to probably invest in a lighter bag. However, I'm very happy with that, and given the preparation that I had, the limited preparation time that I had, I would definitely make the same decision again, and I would highly recommend the Nemo Forte synthetic 20-degree sleeping bag. Something else that worked really well for me was making a plan for stops. Now it did change because I did not pace exactly as I expected I would. However, I still knew where I could have some packages sent, and I knew where I wanted to stop. So I picked out some hostels that I knew I could stop at along the way. I knew packages could be sent there even though I had to adjust the dates. And I had a little bit of a plan already there that I could work with. And I did not need to look up hostels and research hostels while I was on trail, which when I have limited service, it makes it harder to research hostels. So I'd already done that part. I'd already created a rough plan. And even though I did create a day-to-day plan that I did not end up following, I would still do the same thing because I knew places that I wanted to stop, even if it was not on the same day. So I'd recommend anybody planning a through hike to definitely plan your stops, definitely plan on where you want to stay, and be flexible if the actual date changes. The next thing that worked for me was starting alone. I met tons of people on trail, and I never really felt that alone. I guess I did, but there were so many people around that I was able to meet, and I had enough friends, and I think I had a good balance between having times alone where I was walking alone, and then also having friends that I kept recognizing on trail, I kept meeting up with. Even when I could not necessarily be with my friend group, my family, when I wanted to be, I still had people around me that I think was a good balance. On a through hike, I think you do want sometimes alone and sometimes with people that you're able to recognize and be familiar with and talk with and support each other. So if you're worried about starting alone, I would encourage you, you are going to meet people, and then you can choose how often you want to stick together. Some people will like to hike all day and stay every place together every night. Some people would hike alone during the day, but have a plan to meet up at a particular location at night. Sometimes that might not work out if one of you struggles with a location or a set of trail and one of you does not. But as long as you're hiking near somebody, I think that's great. So starting alone worked out for me. I think it can work out for you too if you are worried about that. Other thing that worked well is my clothes. I picked out my clothes, synthetic wear, never wear cotton. The clothes worked out well for me. I'm very happy with the decisions that I made. I used smart wool and just like synthetic cycling shirt that I had. So layers, have a long sleeve layer and a short sleeve layer. You don't need to do a lot of research on clothes or buy the most expensive gear. I just bought all my clothes on Amazon and at the sale rack at REI, and it worked out for me. Another thing that worked well for me was the time of year that I started. I started in February. I'd actually start a week or two earlier if I had the option, just to have more time to finish in one go instead of having to split it up like I have been. But it worked out well for me starting then. There were less people around, did not have to compete for shelter space or whatever, or hostel space that much. And I liked the cooler weather that we started with. I could not imagine hiking in Georgia in some of the heat I was having in New York when that was just the start. Yeah, I did have a few cold nights that discouraged me early on, especially at the Blue Mountain at mile 50. But overall, I'm very happy with the time of year that I started. The weather worked out pretty well. And the last thing that I can think of off the top of my head for what worked well was taking time off for bad weather in order to optimize the views and the experiences. I would rest in a hostel or take extra time in a shelter when it was pouring rain or when the weather just was not looking good, so that I could wait to the next day when it was better weather and have more views. There were a few views that I missed because of clouds, but overall I had a lot more views than some of my family did. I remember when Bushman was texting a picture from the presidential range, just clouds. They would go no matter what the weather was, even if they didn't have any views. And while I appreciate that, I still think it's missing a key piece of the trail if you don't have any of those types of views. So another part was Blue Ridge Parkway, where a lot of the tramway passed through the best Blue Ridge Parkway views when it was cloudy and storming and bad weather. I waited an extra day that day. That was my video where I said things didn't go as planned, but it was worth it because then I had gorgeous views the next day. So waiting out some of the weather to optimize views and experiences, because it's much more fun hiking in fair weather, that was definitely a win that worked well for me on trail. And now something that I would change. I would change my shelter. I started with a heavy hammock, and then a small tent, and then a used tent. If I did this again, I would do a lot more research on shelters, do more shakedowns, so that I would have realized how heavy that hammock was and how I did not want to carry it anymore than to Neil's Gap. I definitely do a lot more research on the shelter that I began with, because I went through way too many shelter systems and extra expenses because I did not do that preparation work. So I definitely changed the shelter. I'd also changed my water bladders. Now, I lasted through Damascus, Virginia. So that's like almost 500 miles with my water bladders. But by that point, they were cracking and water was leaking from them, and they were not reliable anymore. They also would swing around. I dealt with them for the first almost 500 miles of the Appalachian Trail, but I will say that when I switched to smart water bottles, that was a very welcome change, and it was much, much easier to handle my water. And it hooked right with a Sawyer system, so I could just, I didn't have to hold the Sawyer, I could screw it in, and it just worked all around a lot better. using smart water bottles. So don't get water bladders if you're thinking about through hiking. Just start with smart water bottles and it'll make it so much easier. All right, next is my rain gear. I started with a bit too much rain gear. I was worried about things getting wet and myself getting wet and cold early on because of the cold weather. And I thought it could double as wind protection as well. But ultimately I had too much and too heavy rain gear. I started with like a rain poncho, 2 pack covers, also an umbrella, a water resistant coat, and really all I needed was 1 pair of rain pants, 1 water resistant coat, and 1 pack cover. Ultimately, I got rid of the umbrella, I got rid of the excess rain poncho that went over my pack and body, and I was able to fare well and still be happy on trail. So I realized that I needed less than I thought I did, and I was carrying all that extra weight in the beginning that I did not need to. So carry less gear, less rain gear, just 1 layer is fine as long as it works well. If you do invest in those covers that cover yourself and your pack at the same time, make sure that they have some way to tie down on the bottom, like some type of closure on the bottom, because my experience was on windy days, it would lift the whole thing up and over my pack anyway, and then it was hard to get it back down. And on the mountains, it gets very windy sometimes, and in that wind-driven rain, it didn't do a thing. So that's why I like just the pack cover that I can secure and the raincoat that fits snugly on me, rather than something that fits loosely over my whole pack and body system. Venture gas umbrellas did not work well in wind either, so I hardly ever used it. The only time I used it was really in town. So I was carrying it 9 extra ounces that I hardly ever used. Something else that I would change, I was carrying way too much food. That was a slogan for me. I kept talking about it, realizing it, but still buying extra food. I started with a 44-pound pack at Springer Mountain, mainly because I had like 10 days of food, which I did not need because it took me 3 days to get to Neil Gap. So it was completely unnecessary, and I kept impulse buying more food whenever I went somewhere with friends or came across somewhere that was right on trail, just because it was like, well, when am I gonna get to the next one? You don't need that much food. I kept having that fear, I'm gonna run out of food. I never did. So that's a lot of extra weight, and that's something that I would change. And it took me a long, long time on trail to realize that I was carrying too much food and so much extra weight. Next thing that I would change is carrying the physical trail guide. That was an extra ½ pound in my pack. I felt secure because I was like, I'm sure that I'm gonna lose phone battery at some point. Well, guess what? I never did lose battery. I was always able to find somewhere to charge my power bank, and I had a nice Anchor power bank that lasted me even when I was vlogging. So I'm very impressed with the power charging capabilities that I had. Really, if you have enough battery bank, then you will not need the paper guide because you can download it to your phone and use it on there. I was worried about something happening in my phone, and then I was afraid that I'd be lost, but nothing ever did. So I guess it is an extra security blanket if you are thinking that something is going to happen to your phone or it's going to get damaged and not usable in some way. But it didn't happen for me. So I ended up, once I got to New Jersey, I left the actual book at home, and from New Jersey to New Hampshire, just having it on my phone worked just the same, and I didn't need to be carrying that extra weight in the book. So I was like that. I was like, I'm a paper person, not an electronic person. When I was starting my hike, I prefer having paper guides. You may be in that boat too. But after carrying it for a while and trying to eliminate weight wherever I could, I learned that it was not actually necessary. That arm is getting tired, so I switched to a different arm. The next thing that I would change is having shoes, 1 size up, mind you, ready, pre-purchased, so that they are ready when I need them. When I say 1 size up, I mean that when you're hiking, your feet are going to get bigger. So if you pre-purchase shoes your regular size, you're going to learn after your first pair that those shoes don't fit you anymore. So if you normally wear a 12, buy size 13s for your hiking shoes. That will work great. If you normally wear a 13 like I do, buy size 14s. Just purchase 1 full size up for your hiking shoes, then you can pre-purchase ahead of time and have those ready to go. I ran into the issue where my shoes were not available. I could not get size 14s anywhere, and I ended up hiking way too long in the pair of shoes that I had, and therefore I did damage my feet a little bit. Thankfully, my feet are feeling better now, and I think they've recovered because they haven't been hurting as they did for weeks after I got off trail in New Hampshire. I think I've had enough time to recover, but I really did not need to do that to myself. And I was struggling through some of Vermont and even more in New Hampshire with my feet hurting, and that was slowing me down, and I wasn't feeling good. So pre-purchasing your shoes can make sure that you never will run out of shoes when it's time to replace your shoes. Definitely have those ready to go so that someone can mail them to you at any point. I would also start in trail runners versus boots. I started in boots because I was worried about deep snow, which is a legitimate concern, but I never had that deep snow. So I think I would have been fine in trail runners. I had nice warm socks that worked out well because I was also worried about my feet getting wet and then needing to stay warm. But if boots get wet on the inside, they never dry. The trail runners do dry. So trail runners are much better. They're much easier on the feet. I was getting blisters from day 3 going up Blood Mountain with my boots. So get trail runners. Even if you're normally a boots hiker like I am, I will normally wear boots if I'm just going on a day hike. It feels great. But for the through hike, when you're having that same pressure on the same points of your feet every single day, day in and day out for mile after mile, trail runners is the way to go. And then the last thing that I can think of that I would change is bear bag versus bear can. I started with a bear bag, but I kept having trouble. Once I got out of Georgia and did not have the bear boxes anymore, in North Carolina, I kept having trouble trying to find an appropriate location to hang my bag. It's very hard finding a bear hang tree branch that is appropriate height off the ground and that is appropriate length away from the tree. So you can know exactly how to do it and then not be able to find a good branch for it. So because of that, I highly recommend a bear can. Even though it is 2 extra pounds, it does save you from all that work trying to tie and find the right branch at the end of the night. And it's just an extra hassle that I did not need to worry about when I had a bear can. I could just make sure I have all my smellables in that bear can and then place it 70 yards or whatever it is away from the campsite and my tent. So I'd recommend bear can over the bear bag for that purpose. It's also waterproof and much easier. So much less stress when you're trying to make camp in the nighttime. Look at this down tree. I was just clearing some branches off of this trail here. You got some storms on this trail. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed listening to what I've learned on the Appalachian Trail and what worked for me and what I would change about the start of my through hike if and when I were to do a through hike again. Thank you all for listening. Remember to embrace your journey, and as always, happy trails. Go out there and make your journey. If you are about to go on a through hike of your own, I wish you the very best in preparing and enjoying the adventure. Remember, every step is a new day, every step is a new journey, and every day is a new chapter. Go out there and embrace it. Have fun and enjoy the wilderness. J.R. Tolkien, I think it was J.R. Tolkien, said, "Not all who wander are lost." Remember that. Not all who wander are lost. I think it is when you get yourself lost somewhere that you aren't typically, that you really truly find yourself, because you're away from everything else that causes that pressure in your life and in your mind. So go out there, embrace the journey, happy through hiking, and happy trails.